The story begins with our protagonist's mother doing her daily work of delivering feed to the neighboring farms from the store. After Young Soon returns to the establishment, she is surprised when her boyfriend proposes to her, using a piglet with a ribbon for the occasion. The man is a pig farmer and, since she loves him very much, of course, she accepts. Now we will take a small leap in time. The couple is living happily on the farm, and Young Soon is pregnant with their first child. Her husband is very happy with this news and makes sure to tell everyone who visits that he is about to become a father. He has also prepared a notebook that functions as a savings account so that their child will have some money saved for when they grow up. Now focusing on farm matters, Hae-sik is having problems with a sow that is very stressed because she is at the end of her pregnancy. Thus, his wife suggests moving her to another barn, so the rest of the animals won't become agitated. Later that same day, the couple receives some exciting news. The Olympic torch will pass along the road right in front of the farm. However, in the coming days, this news proves to be the beginning of a very difficult path in their lives. Soon after, a man named Woo Byok contacts Hae-sik wanting to demolish his farm because, in this person's mind, the place is not something that will be well regarded by the rest of the world when the Olympics are televised, as it's noticeable that it isn't a place of luxury and also has a pig farm, which is seen as dirty and smelly. Of course, Hae-sik refuses the proposal. He is proud of his work and intends to leave the farm to his son in the future. But that night, in response to his decision, the area where the animals were housed is set on fire. Although Hae-sik doesn't know who it was, neighbors soon appear giving descriptions of the men seen on the property, and now, an investigation has been opened against Woo Byok. The only surviving sow was the one that was relocated to another barn. As the days go by and the investigation starts gaining traction, witnesses from that night completely change their testimonies, and this is the moment when Hae-sik realizes that the Yongra Construction Company's money has bought everyone around him. Thus, the man begins his own investigation, and as soon as Woo Byok is cleared of the charges, Hae-sik schedules interviews with journalists to share everything he knows. But first, Hae-sik meets with the prosecutor handling the case to make him aware that he knows he's not dealing with good people. Hae-sik also leaves Tae-soo the notebook containing the savings for his son, so if anything happens to him, Tae-soo can help his wife. In this way, when Hae-sik leaves the prosecutor's office, we see that Tae-soo has also been bought by the construction company's money, and after he warns Woo Byok that they might have problems, Hae-sik, who is on his way home, is cornered. Woo Byok makes it look like Hae-sik decided to take his own life, and knowing her husband, Young Soon obviously doesn't accept his death. However, there was nothing more that could be done about it, as her visit to the prosecutor also brought no answers, but at least the woman managed to recover the money saved for her son. In fact, she was surprised to receive the notebook, as she did not expect it. So, Young Soon made a decision and, after buying a farm in a village, the woman moved there pregnant, along with the sow that was almost ready to give birth. Regarding the village, the neighbors were very united, and taking that into consideration, when they discovered there would be a pig farm, they all gathered to expel the new family because there was that old prejudice against the animal. However, when they encountered a single mother who was pregnant, despite a brief confrontation, they all ended up accepting Young Soon in the village. After all, that same day, she went into labor, and it was these strangers who helped her at that moment. A child had been born a few days ago and was named Sam-sik, but focusing on another neighbor who was as far along in her pregnancy as Young Soon, she gave birth in the new woman's house shortly after Kang-ho, our protagonist, was born. Everyone expected Mi-ju, Sam-sik, and Kang-ho to be great friends, but only the girl got along with the boys, because Sam-sik, from a very young age, bothered Kang-ho, saying the boy didn't have a father and was as dirty as a pig. Although he was not at fault for retaliating upon hearing these words, the protagonist's mother always reprimanded him with a stick and raised him very strictly, demanding that he study many hours a day and not even letting him eat until he was full, as Young Soo said that it would make him sleepy and prevent him from having quality study time. Mi-ju had been in love with Kang-ho since she was young, and sharing this feeling for her was Sam-sik, which also explains the jealousy the boy felt towards the protagonist. Returning to the way Young-soo raised him, she thought that acting this way would make Kang-ho a successful man, and in the future, he could become a prosecutor to prevent others from going through what the boy's father did. Meanwhile, Mi-ju also had to deal with issues from a young age, as she saw her mother suffering at the hands of her father with the marks he left on her body, and later, the girls celebrated when the man abandoned the family, at least so they wouldn't have that kind of problem anymore. Moving to the day of Kang-ho's first national exam, we see that Mi-ju was there to encourage her boyfriend, and she even painted one of his nails yellow for luck. However, right after passing through the gates, the boy returned to Mi-ju upon seeing that a motorcycle had hit her, resulting in the protagonist going to the hospital with her and skipping the test that year. As soon as Mi-ju woke up, she cried, realizing that Kang-ho missed the exam because of her, despite the protagonist trying to console her by saying he would take it next year. And that night, his mother reprimanded him in a very sad manner. Despite having waited his whole life for the moment of the exam and the result with his acceptance to pursue a career as a prosecutor, Young-soo even insulted Mi-ju for having an accident today, and at that moment, Kang-ho rebelled against the woman for the first time, saying he would then do what she always wanted, which is the opposite of what the boy desires. Kang-ho promises that he will become a prosecutor, but with that, he will never return to stay with her and will follow the path of those who did that to his father. In a leap through time, we see that our protagonist truly became a very respected prosecutor. However, after a hearing, a woman whose husband was convicted approaches him and gives him evidence incriminating the Woo Byok construction company, which is putting the blame on her husband instead of taking responsibility. This construction company is managed by the same person who took Kang-ho's father's life, and instead of taking the evidence to the judge, the protagonist calls Woo Byok to warn him that they have problems. Seeing the relationship between the two, it seems that Woo Byok does not know who Kang-ho's father is, and taking advantage of this, the man gets closer to him with the aim of having Woo Byok adopt him as a son. Meanwhile, Young-soon continues living in the village, and her pig farm is growing more and more. The woman hasn't been in contact with her son since he moved away, and even on his birthday, Kang-ho refuses to see her. In the next scene, we see Mi-ju. She already has 2 children who are under her mother's care and is about to open a beauty salon with a friend. As she always liked painting nails, Mi-ju pursued this profession, but her mother urges her every day to find the children's father and to ensure the village doesn't learn about the girl's current situation. Everyone compares their children and believes Mi-ju is in another country and not divorced, which is the reality. Meanwhile, Sam-sik continued getting into trouble as an adult and was arrested for being caught stealing. Back to the protagonist, shortly after graduating, he attended lectures by the prosecutor who handled Kang-ho's father's case, and during one of their meetings, the protagonist discovered who the man's daughter was. Once again, Kang-ho ended up responding to a complaint indicating that the woman was using illicit substances at a nightclub. After apprehending and searching her, he only found a medication without a prescription for panic syndrome, but nonetheless, Ha-young asked him not to put it on her record to avoid harming her father, who was running for president. However, the encounters between the two didn't stop there, as Kang-ho sought her out again to deliver some things, and now Ha-young began to feel an interest in him. In the next scene, it is shown that Ha-young went so far as to introduce the protagonist as her boyfriend to her father, but as soon as Tae-soo was alone with Kang-ho, he demanded that the boy break up with her. To prevent this, Kang-ho found a scandal involving Tae-soo and took it to Woo Byok, who, of course, was very interested in the weapon in his hands. In exchange for what he received, Tae-soo asked Woo Byok to adopt him and transfer all his businesses to him upon his death. Kang-ho would also marry Tae-soo's daughter, thus preventing them from attacking each other, and having someone in the presidency on his side would greatly ease Woo Byok's life. So the man agreed to this path, and to ensure his secret wouldn't be used against him in the future, Tae-soo insisted that Kang-ho get rid of the woman carrying the future president's illegitimate child. Now that everything is resolved, we see that in the village, Young-soon is excited to finally have her son back home with his fiancée. Of course, the neighbors were also eager to meet her, as the woman's father would likely be the president. But soon after the celebration, when they saw Kang-ho, it was interrupted because the man asked to speak privately with his mother. The protagonist only went there with one objective: to ask Young-soon to sign the papers so that Woo Byok could now become his father, and even though she didn't want this, Young-soon tried to follow her son's wishes. After getting what he wanted, he left, making it clear he had no reason to stay or eat what was prepared since, in all the years they lived together, his mother never sat down to share a meal with him. The neighbors ended up hearing the argument and, of course, felt sorry for Young-soon, who, despite being very strict, did everything she could to ensure Kang-ho's success. Despite everything, the situation isn't peaceful for the protagonist, who had to stop the car and switch places with his fiancée to continue the journey. And now, things get even worse, as Kang-ho fell asleep in the passenger seat, and Ha-young had to get out of the vehicle to retrieve her scarf that had blown away. At that moment, a truck appeared at high speed and knocked the car down a ravine, leaving Ha-young desperate. Kang-ho was taken to a different hospital from the woman, and as soon as his mother was notified of the incident, Young-soon rushed to be by his side. The protagonist is still alive, but due to the swelling in his brain, he is in a coma and at great risk of having aftereffects when he wakes up. Even so, Kang-ho's mother doesn't lose hope that her son will return to who he once was. As for his fiancée, Young-soon was unable to contact her as the number seems non-existent, and moving on to the woman, we see that the accident was something orchestrated by her along with her father. Ha-young's only concern is that the protagonist survived and that Woo Byok discovers the truth and seeks revenge, but to prevent this from happening, Tae-soo ensured that no evidence links them to the truck driver. In any case, Woo Byok has been suspicious of Tae-soo from the start and even visited the protagonist in the hospital, but the truck was stolen, and later the driver took his own life. Regarding Young-soon's farm, as she chose to stay by her son's side, her neighbors and a new employee named Andrea took care of the place. Meanwhile, Sam-sik is out of prison and visiting Mi-ju, and we see he still likes her. Now a few months have passed, and finally, our protagonist opened his eyes. Even after coming out of the coma, Kang-ho returned with the mentality of a 7-year-old boy and can only move his head, so Young-soon decided to bring him to her house and raise him again. After much work over the months and crying alone so her son wouldn't see, Kang-ho managed to move his hands again, not perfectly, but it's a significant progress. And finally, Young-soon secured a spot in a clinic for him to undergo physiotherapy along with other necessary treatments. Meanwhile, Mi-ju found success with her salon, but her friend, who was her partner, ran away with all the profits, leaving many people in the neighborhood angry, including our beloved Mi-ju. In the next scene, our protagonist is much better now and even has the company of Mi-ju's children. Speaking of her, Mi-ju sought out her friend's mother to see if she could get the contact information of her business partner who ran off with all the salon's money. However, as soon as she talked to the lady, Mi-ju discovered that her friend had done the same thing before to her own mother. Going back in time a little, we see that a few years ago, Mi-ju and Kang-ho ended up meeting. The man was still attending college, but he also spent half of his time working in a restaurant to support himself. Knowing that the protagonist had potential, Mi-ju said she would be the first person to invest in him. In this way, she decided to support Kang-ho so he could become the best in his field and proceed with his plan for revenge. We even see part of their story, and Mi-ju kept her word, but we don't know what happened after Kang-ho passed the bar exam, as the memory stops there. Meanwhile, Woo Byok managed to have his men make the wife of the person who drove the truck involved in the accident talk about who paid her and was behind it all. Later, Woo Byok showed the woman's recording to Tae-soo, and being backed into a corner, the presidential candidate thought it was the perfect time to enlighten Woo Byok about who Kang-ho's father was. But it turns out Woo Byok already knew this. Tae-soo really thought the slyest man he knew wouldn't have investigated the prosecutor who handled his dirty work. In fact, Woo Byok makes it very clear to the presidential candidate that he involved Kang-ho in several crimes so that the man could give his all to help him, and if he is no longer useful, he can just be discarded. Switching to Young Soon, she went to her son's apartment and his workplace to gather the protagonist's things. As the woman had never had access to this part of his life, Young Soon realized that many people accused by his work as a prosecutor wished harm upon him. Even though Young Soon didn't want to believe her son had gotten involved with bad people, his belongings proved that he had indeed been a corrupt prosecutor. So back at home, Young Soon lost her temper for a moment and took out her anger on Kang-ho, who, upon hearing he was a bad person, became desperate. This time, Young Soon wants to do things differently, so she decided to raise her son with more love, attention, and connection to the family farm. Going back in time once more, Kang-ho and Mi-ju lived together happily until the day of his appointment as a prosecutor. After that, Kang-ho decided to break up with her to follow his plan, completely hurting the woman who had invested everything in their relationship. Thus, one night when Kang-ho went to return a ball the twins had lost and found for them, it was Mi-ju who opened the gate to the house. The woman was very surprised to see him, and her first reaction was to shut the gate right in his face. Later, Mi-ju's mother told her what had happened, and once again, the woman was taken aback. Focusing on Mi-ju's problems for a moment, she didn't even need to explain to her mother what had happened because, from her look, the lady already perceived something was wrong and just comforted her daughter, saying they would find a way. In the next scene, we see how Tae-soo convinced his daughter to get involved in Kang-ho's accident. The man lied to her, claiming the protagonist had another family and a child with a woman, whom Kang-ho got rid of as part of a deal with the presidential candidate. Hayoung doubted it was true, so Tae-soo told her about what he did to the protagonist's father years ago and said that his daughter was just being used so Kang-ho could get revenge on him, thus she needed to help him. But getting involved in the accident left Hayoung feeling very out of sorts, and now she has panic attacks when she isn't drunk, which is a danger for Tae-soo. Returning to our protagonist, Kang-ho didn't know what it was inside him that made him like Mi-ju so much, but this feeling led him to get a piglet to impress her. However, it turned out the children liked it more than Mi-ju did. Switching to Young Soon, she is facing a new annoying neighbor who bothers her every day because of her pig farming. Then one day, when this neighbor lost his temper and confronted the woman, Kang-ho defended his mother, and in the end, they all ended up at the police station. Since everyone in the village knows Young Soon and knows she does everything right, it was soon understood that the neighbor was the troublemaker in the story. But Young Soon didn't even care about what was happening, because at the police station, Kang-ho remembered a law and stated it perfectly, as if he had returned to being a prosecutor, which made her very happy. In the next scene, we see Tae-soo ordering someone to get rid of Kang-ho to prevent his candidacy from being jeopardized if the man remembers the day of the accident. So, at night, when someone came to attack Kang-ho at his house, opening a parenthesis that he was alone, the protagonist was lucky because Woo Byok had placed men to look for something in his house, so they were able to protect him. A chase soon ensued, ending with Woo Byok's men capturing the assailant. Returning to the protagonist, when his mother arrived, she, of course, didn't believe the things her son said, especially since there was nothing to indicate it was true. The next day, the emotions didn't stop. After Mi-ju dropped her wallet while running to catch the bus, the protagonist picked it up from the ground and hailed a taxi to follow her. Kang-ho only wanted to return the wallet to Mi-ju, but in the city center, he lost sight of her, and later it was the woman who found him when Kang-ho got involved in a small altercation. Mi-ju was impressed that the protagonist went after her just to return her wallet, and soon after, they all got a ride back with Young Soon, who was also nearby. Before Mi-ju went to her house, Young Soon took the moment to apologize to her for all the times she treated her badly and blamed her for Kang Ho not taking that first exam. Later, Kang Ho took advantage of his mother taking care of a sow about to give birth and went to a lakeside to watch some fish. There, he was spotted by Sam-sik, who even started arguing with the protagonist for not helping him when he was arrested. Sam-sik didn't know what had happened to Kang Ho, but it didn't take long for him to notice something was different. Anyway, the protagonist went to the twins' house to tell them about the man who wanted to fight him, and since he was going to have dinner alone at home, Mi-ju's children invited him in. Meanwhile, Sam-sik appeared at his parents' house, where they updated him about Kang Ho's accident, and now the reason for the man acting differently makes sense. Back to the protagonist, it is very painful for Mi-ju to act normal in front of him after the way he hurt her, so she soon sends him home. At the residence, Woo Byok's men returned to search for something again, and since they ran into Young Soon, they had to make up an excuse, and the woman believed them. The good thing about them being there was that when the lady suddenly fell ill, the men were able to take her to the hospital. However, once again, the news is not good for our dear Young Soon, who is unfortunately diagnosed with stage 4 advanced stomach cancer. Do you remember how Woo Byok's 2 assistants had to come up with an excuse for being at Young Soon's house? Well, their lie was that they were surveying the area because they were soon to become residents, and to support this excuse, in the following days, the 2 actually bought a plot from Sam-sik's parents and moved into the house. Returning to Young Soon, now faced with the news that she might not be in this world much longer, the lady decided to prepare everything for her son to become the head of the farm. She also arranged for people who could help the protagonist with tasks he currently couldn't manage. Later, Young Soon took her son to buy suitable boots for managing the family business. However, while in the store, Kang Ho got distracted by a dog on the street that looked very much like a neighbor's, leading the protagonist to wander off, moving away from his mother. When Young Soon found him, her son was surrounded by young boys trying to take his phone because he had refused to buy them drinks, as they were underage. At that moment, she realized she also needed to teach Kang Ho how to defend himself, something he had gotten into trouble for in the past. Later, Young Soon showed the protagonist how he should feed the pigs and care for the animals. Focusing on Sam-sik, the man is in a mess after getting involved with dangerous people and owing them a lot of money. As expected, the day came when they demanded payment, leaving Sam-sik with little time to gather the amount to pay off his debt. With the 3 friends back in town, it wouldn't take long for them all to meet, and when Sam-sik spotted Mi-ju, they sat down to chat and share updates. During the conversation, Sam-sik realized that his friend never stopped liking Kang Ho, and now, despite being in difficult situations themselves, for the first time, both ended up, unfortunately, better off than the protagonist. The following day, things remained challenging for the main family. While Young Soon was taking her son to the city for his recovery procedures, she encountered numerous signs placed by a neighbor, she imagined, stating that the pig farm should end and wasn't welcome in the area. But it doesn't stop there. When mother and son return home, the annoying neighbor is there to test Young Soon's patience, which clearly is at its end when she warns him to stop, or she'll start retaliating. Unfortunately, Young Soon didn't realize this was the least of her problems. Next, the veterinarian for her animals arrives and informs her about an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in a nearby village. This means the government will cull all animals within a 5 kilometers radius to prevent the disease from spreading further. In other words, all the pigs on the farm will cease to exist, except for the piglet at the family's house. Now Young Soon really feels she is losing control of everything, and watching Kang Ho despair as the men begin the process is heartbreaking. Although Mi-ju didn't visit the family to offer her condolences, she acted quickly when she discovered that Young Soon had bought a large amount of herbicide from the man she shared space with for her nail salon. Our dear Mi-ju dropped everything to head to the farm. Upon arriving, as mother and son were returning to the location and upon spotting the bag with the products, Mi-ju grabbed everything. she knew Young Soon might use it to end all her suffering. Opening a parenthesis in the story, a few nights earlier, when she returned home, Mi-ju found her son crying because he had to always go to the bathhouse with a woman, and the little one no longer wanted to endure this embarrassment. Therefore, Seo-jin cried, pleading for his mother to ask his father to return and take him to the bath as all the other children did. However, returning to the present, Mi-ju asks Kang-ho to do this for her and even includes Sam-sik to help with the task. The next day, taking advantage of the fact that Kang-ho was with Mi-ju, Young Soon took care of the final details of her departure. To ensure everything was comfortable for her son, now that the farm was closed for some time, she prepaid a clinic to manage the protagonist's full recovery, where he will live. In the next scene, we return to the issue where Woo Byok's men were searching for something in Kang-ho's house. Well, it seems the pair found it, as we now see Woo Byok laughing upon discovering that it was the protagonist who was leaking his secrets to the press, doing so with a lot of planning. He used a flash drive for the articles, a wig, and women's clothes to avoid being identified. Although he was affected, Woo Byok does not fear Kang-ho because he had extinguished the fire he himself started, which allowed the protagonist to make the connection with Woo Byok that he so desired. In a way, Woo Byok finds Kang-ho's determination admirable. Returning to our protagonist, after the bathhouse, his mother took him to his new home. However, Kang-ho didn't adapt to the clinic and felt abandoned, so at the first chance to escape, which was on the very first day, he left out the door and even injured his nail while going to the family residence using his wheelchair. But the most difficult feeling to manage wasn't this, because when Kang-ho arrived home, he encountered his mother hanging, trying to end all her suffering. In an act of desperation, the protagonist summoned unimaginable strength and lifted the lady, who barely survived. Young Soon, it seems, along with regaining her life, received something even more precious, hope that her son would return to who he was. But for this, she realized she needed to push Kang-ho to his limit. Immediately after saving his mother, shaken by the whole situation, Kang-ho ran away again, and along the way, he met Mi-ju, who set aside all past grievances and supported her friend. During their conversation, Mi-ju attempted to explain to Kang-ho that if his mother tried to abandon him, it was for a good reason, as she would never do so in her right mind. These words sparked curiosity in the protagonist. He asked how Mi-ju could be so certain of what she was saying, and she commented that someone once did that to her. However, Mi-ju would never be able to know the reason that led the person to do it, and Kang-ho has no idea she was referring to him. Thus, when he returned home, the protagonist asked his mother why she abandoned him, and Young Soon decided to tell him about her illness. After this difficult conversation, Young Soon focused on making her son walk again, so in the following days, she put him in various situations intended to rekindle what had once enabled him. With much persistence, Young Soon managed to see and help her boy walk. In the next scene, we turn to Mi-ju. We see a man who dated the former partner of that salon, who stole money from him and owes him, which is why he is in the village. The man wants Mi-ju to take over the woman's debt, and the worst part is that Mi-ju's children think this guy is their father because, to avoid revealing the true identity of the children's father, Mi-ju once lied that it was him. This drama is soon set aside when everyone from the village gathers to present a gift to Kang-ho, hoping to cheer Young Soon up a bit. However, the real surprise for the neighbors was seeing that Kang-ho was walking perfectly and that the motorized wheelchair, fortunately, would no longer be needed. While watching all the neighbors enjoying a barbecue to celebrate Kang-ho's recovery, Young Soon decided to go to the man who wanted to get rid of the pig farm to make peace. She explained her illness and how the farm was the only thing she could leave as an inheritance for her boy, who, with his recovery, would be able to manage it. Young Soon then asked Hua to allow the family to continue with it and not to reveal her secret to anyone. Later that day, Sam-sik once again felt jealous because of the way Mi-ju still viewed and felt things about the protagonist, so after drinking, he decided to propose marriage to her, but of course, Mi-ju put him in his place and refused the proposal. The next day, we see Young-soon being called again to the old building where Kang-ho lived, and there, the concierge handed her a letter. It turns out that before the accident, the protagonist had given a document to the concierge and asked him to deliver it to his mother if anything ever happened to him. Upon reading the letter, Young-soon was puzzled, as if Kang-ho had already known about the danger he was facing, and when she asked the man, he also had no answers to these questions because he did not even remember. Things get even stranger when Young-soon, who never stopped searching for Kang-ho's ex-fiancée's number, discovers that the woman is getting married again. In the following days, Young-soon taught her son how to behave and what to do when her time comes, but while relaxing one night, she understood what he meant in that letter, and upon opening a family photo frame, Young-soon found a memory card. From here on, we will learn a bit about the content on the card. The first thing we see is Kang-ho's diary, where he explains the path he took and what motivated him to make certain decisions. As we already knew, Young-soon was a significant influence on his choices, and revisiting these memories was not easy for her. When the protagonist began trying to unravel his father's case, even before taking the bar exam, Kang-ho sensed something was wrong. In the midst of his story, the protagonist also commented on the time he spent with Mi-ju and how he hurt her when he left. Continuing to investigate those who gave false testimonies against his father, Kang-ho received several apologies, and his doubts about the truth gradually diminished. Thus, the protagonist sought connections to link him to Woo Baek, as he had already clearly established the part regarding the former chief prosecutor's daughter. Seeing this part of Kang-ho's diary was enlightening even for us viewers because we discovered that the mother and son he was supposed to have disposed of are actually well cared for in another country. The man had just staged everything. In addition to explaining all his actions, the protagonist also apologized to his mother for the way he was behaving, and now Young-soon understood everything that was happening. Now that life had given Kang-ho a second chance to leave all this behind, Young-soon made the decision to protect him and burned all the files he kept that could endanger him. However, Woo Baek arrived with his men just then, and as Young-soon asked him to leave them in peace, showing that she had burned all the evidence they had against him, Kang-ho stood up, acting as if he were back to his old self before the accident, and asked if Woo Baek wouldn't prefer to discuss this matter with him alone. But my dear viewers, this was just a nightmare, though I can't say until which point, because there is a barrel with burned documents in the courtyard. In the next scene, we see Kang-ho fascinated by his prosecutor's badge, which he secretly took from his mother. When she isn't around, the protagonist spends hours looking at the object. When Young-soon mentions that Kang-ho will now manage the farm, the man expresses his desire to be a prosecutor again. However, his mother opens up and asks him never to pursue that idea again. Meanwhile, our dear Sam-sik has found a way to get part of the money he owes those men. Sam-sik found an expensive handbag belonging to his mother, a gift from Young-soon when she discovered she wouldn't have much longer to live, and decided to sell it. This granted him a bit more breathing room to manage the remainder of his debt, but only for a few more days. Returning to our protagonist's mother, later she goes to meet her neighbors and asks for help finding a wife for her son, which brings much joy and excitement to everyone. In the following days, the search for a perfect bride begins, one willing to help the small man become the Kang-ho of the past, all while assisting in the farm's management. However, the meetings are truly disastrous, and the protagonist makes it increasingly evident to Young-soon that he only has eyes for Mi-ju. Speaking of Mi-ju, taking advantage of being in the city center, Kang-ho visits her at her nail salon and even ends up defending her from a man who was bothering his beloved. In the middle of this commotion, the two almost get hit by a motorcycle, and when they fall to the ground, some of Kang-ho's memories return, such as the day he was supposed to take his first college entrance exam but missed it because he went to the hospital with Mi-ju, who had an accident. Thus, as soon as he regains consciousness, Kang-ho kisses Mi-ju and repeats that he will be able to take the exam next year, just as he said a few years ago. Young Soon also realizes that some memories of her son are returning, so she tries to hasten finding a bride for the protagonist because she believes that if he marries and has children, he won't have the courage to risk himself again seeking revenge for his father. In the coming days, Young Soon gets lucky because Andrea, who helps her on the farm, heard rumors that she was looking for a daughter-in-law, so he asks if Young Soon would like to meet his excursion companion, which makes Young Soon very happy. In the next scene, we see a meeting between Young Soon and the woman, and immediately, the feeling of happiness is mutual, leading the candidate to ask to meet Kang Ho, thus setting another meeting. Meanwhile, our protagonist was deep in thought at the farm, and as rumors spread quickly, Samsik soon shows up with beers. He is there to see if he can convince Kang Ho to give him the jewelry Young Soon bought for the protagonist's future wife, so Samsik would have another good sum to pay those he owes. And since Kang Ho trusts his friend, Samsik quickly achieves his goal. But the man's bad reputation is known throughout the town, so not long after, both boys' parents are called to the police station, as the police suspected that Samsik stole the jewelry from Kang Ho, despite the protagonist saying he gave it to him. In the next scene, we shift to something else happening elsewhere. Unfortunately, the woman who had given birth to a child out of wedlock with Tae-soo was found lifeless, floating in the sea. And even though the protagonist had arranged for her to live worry-free in another country, the former prosecutor wouldn't leave anything that could ruin his reputation in Kang Ho's hands, so he sent men to deal with the mother and child right after the boat left the port. Naturally, when Woo Byok found out about this, he freaked out because once again, the former prosecutor betrayed the deal they had made. But now, to fix things between them, the future president proposes that the two join forces against Kang Ho, meaning the protagonist must be eliminated for the deal to be sealed. Returning to Young Soon, when she is home with Kang Ho, she scolds him for giving the jewelry to Samsik, although she has already gotten it back. And once again, when the protagonist says he wants to be a prosecutor again, adding now that it's so Mi-ju would be proud of that side of him, Young Soon makes a decision to ask the woman to stay away from her son. Naturally, the way Young Soon spoke hurts our beloved Mi-ju once more. However, as Young Soon revealed her illness and that she doesn't have much time left, the woman couldn't bring herself to tell her what we're about to discover. Tired of hiding this secret, later that tearful night, Mi-ju opens her heart to her mother and reveals the truth, which is that Yi-jin and Seo-jin are Kang Ho's children. Now opening a parenthesis, shortly after Mi-ju and the protagonist ended their relationship, she discovered her pregnancy. But since Kang Ho had decided to keep her out of his life, Mi-ju didn't have the courage to share the news with him. So, with the support of her friend, the one who later betrayed her, she held strong until the end. Her anger towards Kang Ho grew even more when, one day, with the twins already born, she saw from a distance as the protagonist got into the car of the ex-prosecutor's daughter. At that moment, a thought crossed Mi-ju's mind, one many women have had, wondering what her life had become while he enjoyed his. That's when she decided to take the babies to her mother to care for them. Now, back to the present, Mi-ju's mother is shocked by the revealed secret, but asks her daughter never to tell Young Soon the truth, because, according to her, caring for a sick person is very difficult. Regardless of her mother's words, Mi-ju was determined the next day to lay all the cards on the table, so she dressed the twins and went happily to the farm. However, there, she and Young Soon's prospective daughter-in-law had to put their issues aside to help Kang Ho because Young Soon suddenly fainted. During the time the four of them spent at the hospital, Young Soon's prospective daughter-in-law noticed that Mi-ju and Kang Ho had feelings for each other, so she decided to step back from her relationship with the protagonist. Meanwhile, Kang Ho began to face a reality check upon discovering that his mother was very ill. He had some idea that Young Soon had a problem, but not that it was this severe. And when the lady woke up, once again she tried to return to her old life, including her typical rudeness towards our beloved Mi-ju, blaming her for the woman withdrawing from marrying her son. Meanwhile, Samsik was facing the woman to whom he had sold his mother's expensive handbag. Because the handbag's bottom was unstitched, the woman demanded her money back and returned the bag. Fortunately, at that moment, Samsik had the money his parents had sent to pay his debt to those people in his account, so he just transferred the amount, but the other problem would still persist. Well, the focus currently isn't on that, because soon Samsik realized there was a USB drive and a birth certificate hidden within that seam of the bag, something that was certainly Kang Ho's doing. He must have tucked it away in the accessory before giving it to his mother, and then Young Soon passed it on to her neighbor unknowingly. As such, Samsik quickly sought out Kang Ho, and after several attempts, the two managed to crack the password and listen to what was on the USB drive. It contained audio of a conversation between Kang Ho, Woo Byok, and Tae-soo, essentially implicating Woo Byok and Tae-soo in what happened to that mother and baby. But since the protagonist doesn't remember everything, he cautiously asks Samsik to investigate it for him. Thus, the next day, taking advantage of a ride from the duo working for Woo Byok, Samsik goes to meet Hayoung at a cafe. This act had the duo trailing him, as they wanted to know why on earth Samsik would be interested in something with Tae-soo's family. Initially, Hayoung agreed to give Samsik money in exchange for the content he possessed, so they arranged to meet later at the same place. However, soon after Samsik left the cafe, he was captured by Tae-soo's men who had grown suspicious of Samsik's conversation with Hayoung. Now in a seemingly abandoned location, Samsik suffered numerous injuries from Tae-soo's people who did everything they could to extract information from him, and the man narrowly avoided the end, thanks to the intervention of Woo Byok's duo who saved him. Unfortunately, in this conflict, Tae-soo's men took all the materials Samsik had found in that bag, and before the duo could explain who they really were, Samsik fled. Hayoung waited for Samsik the entire time at the agreed location, but it was her father who showed up. And as she stood her ground this time, Tae-soo once again made it clear that Hayoung was just as involved in Kang Ho's accident as he was. The following day, as a provocation, Woo Byok sent Hayoung photos showing that Kang Ho was recovering very well, leaving the woman, who was already frazzled, even more distressed. With mixed fear and guilt, she decided to run away from her marriage, leaving her father furious. Hayoung goes to the village, but she doesn't have the courage to speak with Kang Ho, and as soon as she returns home, her father commits her to a psychiatric hospital as a consequence for causing a scandal that could affect the elections. As for the fate of our dear Kang Ho, Tae-soo's men, well, I believe it was them, set the pig farm on fire to send a warning to the family. In the panic of seeing everything falling apart once again, Young Soon was delayed in getting out of the fire, and since the protagonist was meant to be the last to leave, he ended up passing out before he could escape. At that moment, the memories of our beloved protagonist began to return. Soon, Samsik decided to step in to help his friend because he was the one who spotted two men wearing caps doing something suspicious, and he was also the one who warned Young Soon about the fire. But in the end, we see the duo emerging from the flames, and the one actually carrying someone on his back is Kang Ho, who fortunately woke up and found Samsik unconscious, which made me chuckle amid the desperation. Eventually, the two men are taken to the hospital and are kept under observation. As Samsik is the first to wake up, the police question him about what he saw, hoping it might contribute to the investigation. However, Young Soon prevents Samsik from sharing the information about having seen two men at the farm, and now both he and Mi-ju start to suspect something is going on. Later, when Samsik and the woman are alone, Mi-ju discovers what her friend was doing for Kang Ho, including the recording involving the ex-prosecutor and everything else. Thinking of getting more answers, the two agree to continue investigating what the protagonist and Young Soon are worried about, actually more the lady than Kang Ho, as he doesn't even remember. Before proceeding with their plans, Mi-ju tries to persuade Young Soon to file a police report against the ex-prosecutor for what happened to her farm, but since the lady shows a desire to let everything go to avoid drawing Tae-soo's attention, at this moment, our dear Mi-ju reveals the relationship she and Kang Ho had, including the fact that he doesn't even know about his children. This conversation was beneficial for both of them, as it allowed Mi-ju to finally discover the reason why the protagonist left her, which was to seek revenge for his father. Later, Kang-ho wakes up, but he can barely show that he's back to being himself because, soon after, a detective arrives to arrest him on suspicion of the death of the woman who was carrying Tae-soo's child, although the part about the child being the ex-prosecutors is something the police don't know yet. Thus, the protagonist is taken to the police station, and the only way he thinks he can avoid going behind bars at the moment is by pretending he still has no memory. In this way, Kang-ho is soon released. However, at home, when he's alone with his mother, she tells him to stop pretending and is moved to see that her boy is finally okay. Yet, alongside this happiness comes fear, because Kang-ho asks Young-soon to trust him, since now that he is back, he wants to complete his plan of revenge to finally leave the past behind. With this said, in the following days, Kang-ho asks his mother not to be alone, as he is out gathering evidence to incriminate Tae-soo and Woo Byok. Before reaching the city, Kang-ho takes a detour to see his children, now that he knows about them, after hearing Mi-ju tell his mother at the hospital. He also sought out the woman and gave her the chance to vent her anger at him for leaving her. However, once the anger subsides, Mi-ju asks the protagonist to be careful with these dangerous people, and the secret that he is back to normal will remain between her and Young-soon. For everyone else, it was said that Kang-ho returned to the hospital. In the next scene, we see the duo who work for Woo Byok shocked to discover that it was not Tae-soo who ordered the farm to be set on fire, but rather their boss. Switching to Mi-ju, as she watched the videos her little ones made on their phone, she discovered that, by luck, they recorded Tae-soo's daughter putting some substance in Kang-ho's water on the day of the accident, which, though tragic, is evidence that could help the protagonist. Considering that Mi-ju cannot sit still while everything is in chaos, the next day she dragged Sam-sik to Ha-young's house and even tried to get inside to see if she could coax something out from Kang-ho's ex-fiancé. Unfortunately, as we know, Ha-young is hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. By a stroke of luck, or misfortune, it was not the first time Mi-ju crossed paths with Ha-young. Once Ha-young was a troublesome client of our dear Mi-ju and mentioned a psychiatric hospital where she could have Mi-ju committed anytime she wanted, due to her family's considerable power. This way, Mi-ju knew exactly where to go. Infiltrating the hospital, it didn't take long for the duo to discover Ha-young's room. After the man used his skill to unlock the door, Dr. Mi-ju and patient Sam-sik went into action. Meanwhile, the protagonist went after the captain who had helped him with the plan to take the mother and baby to another country, who was recently found lifeless, and discovered what really happened. In the next scene, we move to Young-soon, and she is saying goodbye to Andrea, who is leaving due to the end of his exchange program, but is immensely grateful to the lady for accepting him as a helper on her farm. Later, after a small discussion with her friends, which was actually more of a misunderstanding, the rest of the village that didn't know about Young-soon's illness became aware of the matter. One of her neighbors, who was in the middle of the confusion, deeply regretted having spoken offensively. After all, she had always felt inferior to Young-soon because Sam-sik, who is her son, had become a questionable person, totally unlike Kang-ho. Moving on to Woo Byok's two men, who lived in the village for some time, we see a scene where their boss gives a direct order for the pair to eliminate the protagonist once and for all. Returning to Mi-ju and Sam-sik, it was the woman who managed to enter Ha-young's room. At first, it was difficult to convince the former prosecutor's daughter to leave with the pair and give a statement against her father, but thanks to Mi-ju not being a person who gives up easily, she made it clear that if anything happened to the protagonist, Mi-ju would go after Ha-young and end her life. Ha-young still feels bad about what she did to Kang-ho and is angry with her father. The woman agreed to embark on this plan, so in the next scenes, we see the three of them fleeing the hospital. Even Kang-ho encountered them along the way, surprising Sam-sik and Ha-young to see that he had returned to who he was. However, now the protagonist feels even more pressured. He has to make his plan work to bring down Tae-soo and Woo Byok, After all, Mi-ju is involved in the middle of this mess, and Kang-ho couldn't bear to lose another person he loves. Well, using his criminal side for good, Samsik knows of a place where they can stay safe until Tae-soo and Woo Byok are arrested, which is the building where those men he owes live, where illegal games also take place. Taking advantage of the fact that Kang-ho has recovered his memory, Samsik says that the boss of the place and his men will not be arrested thanks to him being friends with a prosecutor, but in exchange, they must provide shelter for them to conduct a fake investigation to keep the media away. Surprisingly, this excuse was well received, and even Samsik's debt was forgiven. Now with the girls settled in a room, Kang-ho had a private conversation with Ha-young, and despite being the one who was most hurt in this story, the man apologized to her for using her to get to Tae-soo. Also at this moment, Ha-young's doubts about ever being loved by the protagonist were put to rest, as he told her that Mi-ju had never left his heart and that one of the most difficult things the protagonist had to do was leave her. Shortly after, we see that before Kang-ho went after more evidence, Mi-ju overheard the end of the conversation and bid him farewell with a kiss, then asked him to be careful, as she would be waiting for him to return. Meanwhile in the village, Woo Byok's men returned to the place to finish off the protagonist, but upon seeing that they were being followed, the pair realized that they would probably be discarded right after completing the job. So, they first fought their colleagues and then fled. The next day, Kang-ho went to meet Tae-soo at an event where the presidential candidate was and caught him by surprise. But the time hadn't yet come for the protagonist to announce Tae-soo's arrest. In fact, the protagonist went to him to suggest a deal. If Tae-soo agrees to testify against Woo Byok, Kang-ho will clear him of the upcoming accusations, which he will obviously face, and will reduce the penalties that the candidate will receive. The protagonist also promises to return Tae-soo's daughter and emphasizes that he is only proposing this deal because he wants the man who ended his father's life and tried to do the same to his mother behind bars. In the next scene, we move to Woo Byok talking to one of the men he had sent to finish off Kang-ho, and seeing him alive surprised the gentleman. After all, right after his man finished the job, others would end him. However, during the conversation, when Woo Byok's former employee was having his life threatened, Kang-ho appeared with police officers to arrest him for attempting to take someone's life. At this moment, we discover that this ambush was planned by the protagonist along with Woo Byok's former employee. Now, the investigations to bring down Woo Byok have officially begun through the justice system. Kang-ho even gave an interview to the press, which surprised the village people who didn't know he was well again when they saw him. The next day, everyone prepares to go to the courthouse to watch our dear Kang-ho acting again in his profession, and of course, his mother was emotional. After all, she had asked so much for her little boy to return to his life before. Focusing on the trial, several things happened at this exciting moment. One of the most important things is that Young Soon, who was already very ill, nearly fainted while her son was speaking, but as the lady knew this could hinder him from giving his best performance, she mustered all her strength to remain firm and strong in her seat. Speaking a bit more about the trial itself, Kang-ho first exposed Woo Byok's bad side, which was getting rid of anyone who ever presented a threat, and truly this part cannot be denied. After all, they are lifeless. Kang-ho also brought to the case another open case, that of the mother and baby who was found floating in the sea and who had worked for Woo Byok in the past. Continuing, the protagonist interconnected all the cases by having Woo Byok's former employee speak about the order he had received to end the lives of some people, whom we saw at the beginning of the first episodes that Kang-ho had ordered to be arrested, and also about Woo Byok giving the order to end the protagonist's life. To support his accusation, Kang-ho called Tae-soo to testify, and as agreed, the presidential candidate confirmed all the wrong things that Woo Byok does and did in his time as a prosecutor, which he even went so far as to cover up. However, Tae-soo didn't expect that Kang-ho would use Ha-young anyway, and soon after, he was forced to watch his daughter testify and talk about the accident in which she caused Kang-ho's temporary memory loss. The woman also added that one of the reasons her father wanted the protagonist dead was because he had discovered about the son Tae-soo had outside of marriage. Haiyang added one more fact, which was about Tae-soo conspiring with Woo Byok 35 years ago to take the life of Kang-ho's father. Putting this great chaos together, the four were interconnected, and the only way to thoroughly examine this situation would be to do a DNA test on the child, who lost his mother to Tae-soo's men when she jumped from the boat in an attempt to survive somehow. The boy is alive, and the captain who was going to help the mother and son leave the country took care of him all this time, and now, after the test results came out, Tae-soo was arrested for numerous crimes, along with Woo Byok. As for Haiyang, she received a slightly shorter sentence. After all, the woman confessed to having attempted to take her fiancé's life at the time, but in any case, living away from her father is much better. In the following days, Young Soon's birthday party took place, and there the woman thanked her friends for always helping her, and her son for fighting for justice until the end. Young Soon also gave her blessing to the couple Kang-ho and Mi-ju, giving them the pair of wedding rings she had received from the protagonist's father years ago. That same night, Kang-ho decided he would sleep next to his mother every day until it was time for him to leave home and live his married life with Mi-ju. However, while singing Young Soon to sleep, unfortunately, Kang-ho began to notice that his mother was slowly slipping away, and at the end of the song came the end of our beloved Young Soon's life. Although she didn't have as long a life as expected, Young Soon lived hers intensely, and at its end, the lady passed away very happy, fulfilled that her son was well and content. So at her funeral, it couldn't be just sadness, and the song she always sang, which translates to, "I am very happy," was sung by all her friends, neighbors, and son who knew it was the best tribute to represent her. In the next scene, we fly a bit forward in time and see that Sam-sik has finally overcome his love for Mi-ju. Now he visits Haiyang in jail and brings gifts to win her over. As for the pair who worked for Woo Byok, they really did become farmers. After all, they had already bought some land from Sam-sik's parents and now truly live in the village. Meanwhile, Kang-ho released those people from the beginning of the season whom he had imprisoned, even knowing they were innocent. The protagonist had to keep them in prison so that neither Tae-soo nor Woo Byok would end them. And even though they were imprisoned for 2 years, they were all extremely grateful when they were released. As for our beloved Mi-ju and the twins, they are happier than ever with Father Kang-ho present in their lives, and as the little girl had predicted when she was in love with the protagonist, now the four of them take care of the happy farm. Young Soon left a letter for her son, apologizing for all the times she erred as a mother, even though she was trying to do right, and one thing she said, which my mother always told me too, is that it's their first time playing this role, just as it's our first time living this life. So it's common to have mistakes and successes, but we should always apologize for them and live in the best way. Of course, our protagonist was moved, however from this reading he had a great idea and proposed to Mi-ju, just as his father had done years ago, using a little pig to carry the rings. What did you think of this season? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like and share to help me. See you next time.